Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Psychological Examination of Serial Killer series. Tonight, we're going to be talking about Ted Bundy. Pretty much everybody knows who Ted Bundy is. He was one of the most notorious serial killers in American history, and also, believe it or not, one of the most beloved, which is kind of crazy because he was responsible for the abduction, rape, and murder of numerous young women during the 70s. He was born on November 24th, 1946. And he was executed in the electric chair on January 24th, 1989, after being convicted of multiple counts of murder. So tonight we're going to go over some of the key points related to the psychological evaluation of Ted Bundy. And the first one we'll start with is antisocial personality disorder. So Ted Bundy exhibited characteristics consistent with antisocial personality disorder, or ASPD. This disorder is characterized by a disregard for the rights of others, a lack of empathy, and a history of deceitful and manipulative behavior. And he definitely had that. His ability to charm and manipulate his victims and those around him is indicative of these exact traits. Next thing we'll talk about is narcissism. Bundy displayed narcissistic traits, including an inflated sense of self importance and a belief in his own superiority. His ability to present a charming and charismatic facade while concealing his violent tendencies is often associated with narcissistic personality traits. Narcissistic people not only believe that they are the center of the universe, so to speak, but also many, many times, because of that confidence, they have the ability to charm others and to have other people follow them and believe what they say, even when they're bold-faced lying to them. And that'll lead us into the next thing we're going to talk about, which is charm and manipulation. Bundy was known for his charm and his ability to manipulate those around him, including law enforcement, judges, and even his victims. This skillful manipulation allowed him to evade capture for an extended period of time and gain access to potential victims. And there were even times when he was caught, like almost red-handed, not really killing the person, but caught by the police where they had him, and he was able to talk his way out of it or escape in some way, which is pretty spectacular. The next thing we'll talk about is sexual deviance. Bundy's crimes were driven by extreme sexual deviance, including sadistic acts and even necrophilia. His paraphilias, or atypical sexual interests, were a significant aspect of his criminal behavior. So for him, for different serial killers, the motivation is different. For some, it's power. For some, it's a kink, it's sex, it turns them on. For other people, it's a resentment and a hatred. Like some people that kill women will kill women because they hate their mother. You know, their mother was cruel and awful to them. So they associate all women with that. And they are out to punish. You know, for Bundy, it was, a lot of it was a power trip, and also it was a kink for him, a sexual deviance. Next thing we'll talk about is a criminal signature. Forensic psychologists and criminal profilers have examined Bundy's criminal signature. That's the unique aspects of his motive and the rituals that he used. Understanding the consistency in his methods and behavior will provide insight into the underlying psychological factors at play. So with every serial killer, there's usually a motive, which I just talked about, of why they do it. But also, a lot of time, there's a ritualistic aspect to the murders. So they might do things in the same way. They might take trophies, like the same trophies every time, maybe an ear, maybe a nose, maybe a driver's license. Maybe they take a piece of their clothing or their underwear or something like that. Usually it follows a pattern, and that enables law enforcement to identify when they have another victim by the same killer. A lot of times is they'll say, oh, here's another body that has its ear missing. So that must be the ear bandit or whatever the press ends up calling the serial killer. And so they can kind of link them together. And a lot of times that's because of the need of the killer themselves to perform the murders in a ritualistic fashion. So there's a pattern that they need themselves to follow in order to receive the proper amount of gratification from the act. The next thing we'll talk about is his childhood and his family dynamics. So Bundy's childhood and family background have been explored as potential contributors to his criminal behavior. Now, while he did maintain a facade of normalcy, there are reports that suggest that he may have experienced difficulties in his early years, some forms of abuse, and even questions about his paternity. So he didn't even know for sure if his dad was really his dad, and that could have really messed with his mind. Once again, as I've said many times on these videos, definitely not an excuse for what he did. But we're just trying to understand a little bit of why he did what he did. The next thing we want to talk about here is an escalation in the pattern of violence. And this is something that is pretty typical for just about every serial killer out there. So Bundy's crimes escalated over time, moving from burglary and theft to violent assaults and then finally murders. And then even the murders got worse and worse as they went. The progression of his criminal behavior is a subject of analysis for forensic psychologists trying to understand the factors that drive these people to do the heinous acts that they do. And as I said, in many cases, you notice this in the case of Jeffrey Dahmer. It's a great example of this, where he started out with animals. He started out experimenting on and hurting small animals, and he just kind of escalated from there, moved up to larger animals, then finally to people. And then it wasn't enough to just kill the people. Then he wanted to move to weird experiments on the people, seeing if he can reanimate them, seeing different things that he could do with the bodies. A lot of times it will keep escalating and keep getting sicker and sicker and sicker as they go. And the reason for that is once you become used to something, you kind of become acclimated to it, then it doesn't have the same thrill. A lot of people that watch pornography will go through this same kind of phenomenon where when you start out as a little kid, you're looking at stuff like the Sears catalog and women in bras and panties. And that is just exciting as hell. Seeing a woman in her bathing suit is an amazing thing when you're little. And then as you go, it gets more and more deviant the more you're exposed to pornography, until it gets to a point where you need to see very gross things and very sick things that ordinarily wouldn't turn you on in the beginning, but now you need that to get that same kind of thrill. It's the same kind of thing with these serial killers. When they start, they receive gratification from what they're doing. But as they've done it over and over and over again, it gets old and they get bored with it and they need more in order to get that same feeling. The next thing we're going to talk about is a lack of remorse. Bundy displayed a remarkable lack of remorse for his crimes. Even after his arrest and during the legal proceedings, he still maintained a manipulative and defiant demeanor, denying responsibility for the murders and attempting to control the narrative and to manipulate even the jury and the judge and the lawyers and everybody in the case. Now, Bundy's case is, on some levels, simple, but on other levels, very, very complex. And forensic psychologists and criminologists continue to study this case for insights into the psychology of serial killers. Now, while it is interesting and in some ways informative to go down paths like this and try to understand this stuff and talk about it, you're never going to fully capture the complexity of the killer himself or his behavior or the motivations he had. A lot of that, because there's multiple factors that go into this. And you will see in some cases where the experts will, or even the prosecuting attorney, will come up with a theory of what the motivation was, and then to the very, very end, the defendant will completely deny that that was the motivation at all. You know, we see this in the Manson case. Bugliosi came up with the whole helter skelter theory. And to the very end, Manson and his followers all said that's BS. You know, it had nothing to do with that. We just wrote that on the wall because we're trying to get a rise out of people. You know, that it wasn't the theory that Bugliosi came up with wasn't the motivation behind the murders. There's theories out there with that case that it was actually because he was a failed musician and he was pissed off because Meltzer, who lived at that home before, had screwed him over and that he wanted revenge. You know, but that's for another video. I hope that you enjoyed this one. Let me know down in the comment section what you think of Bundy and what you think his motivations were and all of that. As always, it's up to you to make up your own mind, and I will catch you on the next one. Until I speak to you again, love many, trust few, and do harm to none. God loves you, and so do I. Bye bye.